Welcome to Hydrogen Rising, a bi-weekly podcast created and hosted by the global law firm K&L Gates that brings you analysis of critical, cutting-edge issues impacting the global hydrogen market. We look forward to your engagement and feedback. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas about new topics you'd like us to cover.
Welcome back, Hydrogen Rising listeners. I'm Sandra Safro. I am Associate General Counsel at the Edison Electric Institute, and I am very excited to be here with you all today and to be joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, David Wochner, who's a partner in the global law firm K&L Gates. David, it's great to see your face. It's been a little while. How are you doing?
Yeah, Sandy, doing great. I feel like, it's May in Washington. We've got a lot of agencies moving on up on this 180-day deadline from the Infrastructure Act to get moving on funding things. So I feel like we're approaching that hydrogen hub issue at DOE, their funding opportunity announcement really soon. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed for sure. We're definitely looking out for that too. For today's episode, we have a treat for you and kind of along the lines of the subject that we've been talking about today with expanding the hydrogen economy in the United States. We are joined today by the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association, or FCHEA, which is the National Industry Association for the expansive and growing hydrogen and fuel sector. FCHEA has been around since 1989, and for those of you like me who might need to pull out a calculator, I will tell you that is 33 years of work on hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. It was originally named the National Hydrogen Association and then later merged with the U.S. Fuel Cell Council. So resulting Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association. So joining us today from FCHEA is Frank Wolak. Frank is the president and CEO of FCHEA. And before joining, Frank was a senior vice president at Fuel Cell Energy, Inc., where he initiated and developed some of the most innovative and largest fuel cell technology applications in the world, and worked closely with the U.S. Department of Energy, Congress, and state agencies to define and sustain programs for hydrogen and fuel cells throughout the United States. And in case that does not tell you enough about Frank's depth of experience in this area, he is also a founding member of the Connecticut Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Coalition, a past chair of the California Stationary Fuel Cell Collaborative, serves as a governor appointment to the New Jersey Fuel Cell Task Force, and previously served 2 terms as the appointment of the Secretary of Commerce to the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Advisory Committee. So quite a history with hydrogen. So Frank, first, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you. And can you tell us a little bit more about FCHEA, what types of companies you represent, and FCHEA's history with hydrogen and fuel cells?
Sandy, thank you very much for having me on the program. David as well. This is a treat to be on this and actually invited. So hopefully I add some really interesting subject. I'm going to open up with a point, though. You mentioned the Hydrogen Hub activity is moving forward, and I had wagered that it would be issued at 10:08 a.m. this morning, and put that out to a few of my colleagues. I think I lost that bet, but I'm hoping that at 10:08 a.m. one day this week, we might all be pleasantly surprised by the DOE making some progress there. Well, as far as FCHEA, you captured the origins. We started as the National Hydrogen Association, or I should say our roots were as the National Hydrogen Association. We had, there had been a parallel organization called the U.S. Fuel Cell Council. Around 2011, the 2 organizations had many of the same members, and they felt it was better to combine into a new entity. And there was the birth of FCHEA. So over those 33, now I have to write this down, 33 plus years of existence, we have been a leading advocate for hydrogen and fuel cells in the United States. Since the creation of FCHEA, we have focused on policy activities, advancement of the technologies, and in many ways, we were the only voice arguing for advancement of hydrogen, reinforcing budgets within the Department of Energy, and carrying the torch as the technologies were being developed, as the interest in decarbonization rose. And here we are today, over 80 members, in a world where, as given by your podcast, hydrogen is rising, and there's no pun intended with that. But for many of the years that FCHEA was active, we were trying to advocate for things that were quietly behind the scenes. The momentum about decarbonization was yet to emerge. The value proposition of hydrogen around the world was still somewhat dormant. And then you begin to fast forward issues of energy security, issues of decarbonization. How do you move forward with making renewable resources more flexible? And so hydrogen began to see itself emerge as a very useful resource tool. And that's where we really see it today. And among the FCHEA companies, as I said, we've got about 80 companies right now, and they run the full spectrum of vehicle manufacturers, industrial gas companies, participants in the oil and gas world, automotive manufacturers, pure play fuel cell manufacturing companies, and a host of parties who have an interest in seeing hydrogen and fuel cell technology advance. They're all pulling together in the same direction to take hydrogen and move it upward and more mainstream in our energy spectrum. So I think that's the basic background of FCHEA. We continue to carry the torch in a broad way and look forward to aggressively pursuing the interests of hydrogen.
Frank, that's great, and thanks. Let me add my thanks to Sandy's for joining us. Your comment about DOE releasing it at 10:08. I'm fingers crossed that DOE is that creative and strategic in how they're looking at it. I suppose that's kind of like if you're in the cannabis business, something coming out at 4:20 in the afternoon, right? I mean, a similar thing for us. Well, look, I think DOE has done some really hard thinking around the hub proposal and opportunity, and we're very excited about that for a number of our clients. So, look, I mean, you outlined really how you all have been at the forefront for a lot of years on this, and there are a lot of us, admittedly. I mean, Sandy and I both grew up as practitioners in the molecule space and working, closely with infrastructure related to molecules, natural gas, other fossil commodities. There's a lot of us that over the last few years have come into the hydrogen space now, and there's so much excitement building around that. Kind of how is FCHEA thinking about that excitement as someone who has been in the trenches? Kind of how do you adjust your process and where are the big opportunities, right now, given everything you've worked on for so long?
I personally and FCHEA and our members, we are pleased by all this excitement. It is good to be in the limelight, to see people respect the value that hydrogen can bring. And so, the conversations that are going on around the country and around the world are all positive. But I would like to note that we view opportunities emerging, but we also view these opportunities as long-term, evolutionary, and sustainable. And, I think that's important for the audience to hear that it takes years of cycles of development for any new renewable or clean technology to emerge. Hydrogen right now is seeing much attention, and the opportunities are beginning to emerge. But, I can remember when people sat around 2001 wondering whether solar technology was going to take root. And you look at that and you say, well, 20 years later, we're really seeing solar technologies drop in cost. The general populace, sees adoption of solar technologies, both wholesale as well as retail everywhere. But that didn't happen overnight. So I see the emergence of hydrogen really being long-term. I also see it being evolutionary. The automakers, the vehicle manufacturers, the fuel cell manufacturers, the electrolysis manufacturers have been quietly evolving their technologies, refining, making them more durable, and in some ways invisible over the time that I've been within this industry. And so now we begin to see that they are ready to emerge and come out and use the policy drivers, the opportunities for driving down costs, the business-to-business connections to bring many of those technologies forward. So what you see in the evolution of what the automakers are doing, the heavy vehicle manufacturers, the aviation industry, and the industrial gas companies, where you see them beginning to deploy projects and show interest, really is an evolutionary extension of the readiness of the technologies and the marketplace coming together. And then I think the last piece, as I mentioned it, that it's sustainable. This is not a short-term limited opportunity. The need for decarbonization, deeper decarbonization, world issues today are driving the subject of reliability, of energy security in different ways. And hydrogen as a resource has many of the features that allow it to be a complement to the renewable resource development that we got through storage or through creation of vehicle fuels. And it also is a really critical component in the way we look at the creation of our fuel resources locally within the boundaries of any one country. All those factors come together to make this, as I said, long-term, evolutionary, and sustainable. As far as specific opportunities, what you're beginning to see is project level activity, not just individual automakers or vehicle manufacturers or research and development demonstrations, but you're really seeing to see around the world, and we will see more of it in the U.S., deal structures coming together. Large electrolysis facilities, some of our members like Air Liquide are building major facilities. Plug Power, Cummins, they're around the world with announcements, as well as vehicle manufacturers such as Nikola, where they're actually doing real work. And so these opportunities are being seen in a variety of ways. And so I'm really positive these are opportunities that are in fact beginning to sow the seeds of real hydrogen activity in the U.S.
That's really helpful. And that project level development, I think, is what's most notable. As you said, the complement to the development and deployment of renewable resources, I think, is really being recognized, not just by project developers, but you look at the financial markets too, and investment funds, banks, et cetera, are stepping up and are looking at how to finance some of these projects. So all really exciting. I'm curious. It does, as being the head of a trade association, it does take advocacy and work at the policy level and the regulatory level to move certain initiatives forward that can help the industry. So, from that side of things, what's on FCHEA's wish list? Like, what do you think needs to happen either at the federal level or state level in order to continue to build out hydrogen at scale?
There is a lot of progress that's been done. The bipartisan infrastructure bill created the template for the hydrogen hubs and a whole host of other programs within that funding. There remains a wish list for the tax policy side of that, which was the second tier. There are many features within that tax policy of the original Build Back Better structure and other forms that could contain tax credits, with the clean hydrogen production tax credit and a whole host of other things. So energy storage credits, carbon dioxide sequestration, advanced manufacturing. And so that's actually a fairly long wish list, all embodied in what was a structure that was somewhat stalled. And the ability for the industry to really take advantage of the bipartisan infrastructure first step and move forward in the U.S. is really dependent on Congress and policymakers in the U.S. government seeing those features and finding a means to put them through a legislative vehicle to enactment. So that is certainly a wish list item. The other wish list I have for the industry is probably more subtle. It's that within the administration, within Congress, within the Department of Energy, within agencies, that they recognize the value that hydrogen can play in various components of the economy, and they don't look at it as something that they can just pay a small amount of attention to, that it has to continue to be framed in the context of education. Codes and standards have to be written, and that in order to embrace hydrogen and all the technologies, there's a lot of subtle pieces that have been embraced with traditional resources, with the emergence of renewables, wind, solar, EV charging, all of those things that we have had in our past have had a steep understanding and a recognition and an embodiment by policymakers outside of the mandates that were in state or federal laws. So hydrogen needs the same kind of embracing.
The first point you made about tax policy, just curious, I think the various iterations of Build Back Better and then Build a Better, BBBA and then BBA, one of the last versions I had seen, I think, was the ratcheted production tax credit associated with the carbon intensity of the hydrogen produced. Has FCHEA taken a position on that? Are you generally supportive of that type of model for a production tax credit?
Yes. In fact, FCHEA, early in the foundation and the architecture of the bill, we were working closely with congressional staff to try to find a way to establish a production tax credit that was balanced, that recognized the spectrum of carbon intensity, was not simply 100% green, and also recognized that there are a number of resources within the U.S. that were based on natural gas and with carbon capture could in fact bring hydrogen into the forefront and in a way that was moving low-cost hydrogen with the decarbonization features forward. So we have been advocates for the structure as it's been in, I'll call it the standing bill structures, because we think it provides a great balance between moving us all forward to a greener, more decarbonized world, but also recognizing the uplift that getting hydrogen across the entire energy economy from the various resources that we're blessed with in the U.S. And we think that the PTC structure as proposed really creates a balance that moves many people in our space forward.
I wanted to ask you a question, Frank, as you were describing a greener, more decarbonized world. And I know we've been spending a lot of time in our conversation with you today talking about the United States. But of course, on the podcast, we're thinking about this, and folks in the market are thinking about hydrogen really in a global sense. And you mentioned one of the more subtle components of a hydrogen economy, not just in the United States, but really I expect on a global level, which is the development of codes and standards, or the refinement or modification of codes and standards. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about what's happening in that area, the work that FCHEA is doing, and how the development of codes and standards really impact the ability for us to build a hydrogen economy at scale, whether it's nationally or globally.
Well, the subject of codes and standards is rather technical, but what I would say is that there is an enormous body of knowledge built around safety, codes, and standards as they relate to hydrogen and fuel cells that go back decades. The industrial gas companies that have been producing the 11 million metric tons of hydrogen that are used in the U.S. today have been steeped in the development of codes and standards. But the work, it goes back to my point of being evolutionary. And in order for more breakthroughs in vehicles, aviation, the deployment at more of a consumer level and industrial level of hydrogen, and the ability to create innovation and take innovation of a product and move it forward, means that those various codes and standards have to continue to be looked at, refined, and move forward. The last thing that any of us would like to see is an innovative product that is launched in 2025 that can advance decarbonization that is stalled because someone in 2023 didn't look ahead and say, we could adjust a code or a standard, work with an agency, and make what could even be a modest change or adjustment. But these things take time. So we work very hard working with a number of entities and the Department of Energy. We have a contract with the DOE to help catalog all the codes and standards work that's going on around the country. We don't write the codes, but we work with all of the safety and codes agencies to make sure that the state of the art is moving forward. But any kind of policy movement that involves regulation, that involves consumer products, that involves industrial products, needs to be wrapped in a series of good codes and standards so that people developing products know that they can, when they're ready to employ the products, have the code, are designing to a set of codes and standards, and that when they're ready for product launch, they don't have to think about the time delay to get a certain standard adopted. So we work very hard at laying that groundwork way in advance of the need.
I think that's really helpful to hear. It's particularly heartening to hear that these codes and standards generally go back decades. It's not surprising because, as we know, while hydrogen at scale is new, hydrogen in our economies is not new. But I think there is, as there has been for probably every energy resource that we've tried to put into our economies, there is hesitation and I think concern around whether it truly will be safe. So it is very heartening to hear that there is a lot of experience around codes and standards for hydrogen, sort of generally in the knowledge base of folks who have been working in this area, and that it does go back decades. Frank, I think we've got time for one more question. And I know we've talked a bit about opportunities and you've touched on what some of the obstacles are, but just wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about what some of the obstacles are that you see to the development of a hydrogen economy at scale, and what you and FCHEA are working on to help overcome those obstacles.
Well, first, I think I want to say that we don't see any major obstacles. And what I mean by that, and I talked about the technology's been ready, there's market interest, there's money and investment willing to happen, there's policy motivation that is driving much of what's being moved forward. And so it's just obstacles get overcome very quickly when there's motivation and momentum. So I think that's good to have. But as far as major obstacles, I think we all have to look at hydrogen's position now is a function of the pace at which we elect to decarbonize. The obstacles for hydrogen are going to be overcome as fast as we want to move harder and harder to decarbonize, and policymakers just say that that's an important thing. I think there's also a point about the education. We can't be stalled as we create new innovative projects by state government, federal government agencies having to play catch up. And that's hard work by people like our organization within our member organization to assure that the educational pathways are laid open. And then I also think that there really has to be continued policy momentum. The government needs to keep wanting to take the embrace of new job creation, of innovation, the investment, and see it all as a good thing for the U.S. and equally worldwide. And so the major obstacles that I see are if we just choose to be slower in our efforts to decarbonize and to move forward, that will have an obstacle, and the time frame for hydrogen deployment will be deferred. But I don't see any major obstacles. There's an enormous amount of momentum going on around the world, and many people well equipped to work hard to move this industry forward.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I think that's a great note to end this episode on, actually, very positive. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I think we both really enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot.
David, Sandy, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And I look forward to 10:08 tomorrow morning for the Hydrogen Hubs news. Thank you.
We'll be checking every day this week. As always, thank you to our Hydrogen Rising listeners. If you have any questions stemming out of this episode, please feel free to reach out to myself or to David Wochner. And as always, we will be back with another episode of Hydrogen Rising in just a couple weeks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hydrogen Rising. Be sure to subscribe to receive timely notifications of future episodes, and check out our market-leading publication, The Hydrogen Handbook, on our website at www.klgates.com.